Hello and welcome to the Officio Spotlight podcast. I'm Simon Lipscomb and thank you very much for listening. Today I'm really excited to say that I'm joined by Victoria Mallinckrodt. Victoria is the Procurement Development Lead at the World Economic Forum. I'm sure for many of our listeners it's an organisation that's known, but for those of you who haven't, the forum was established in 1971. It's a not-for-profit foundation. It's headquartered in Geneva in Switzerland. It's independent, impartial, and it strives to demonstrate entrepreneurship in the global public interest. Victoria's previously worked at HSBC and is also the co-founder of Finance Sisters, which is an organisation that looks to support and mentor women in finding a secure and positive financial future. And today I'm really pleased that Victoria's agreed to talk to me specifically about the topic of supplier diversity. So Victoria, thank you very much for joining me for this conversation. We should probably start with a little bit about you and your role at the moment and what you're doing.
Yeah, thanks, Simon. And thank you so much for having me here. Really exciting to talk to you about supplier diversity. My role with the World Economic Forum is to look after procurement for initiatives and projects that are funded through grants. So as the international organization for public-private cooperation, and our mission being to improve the state of the world, we have a number of projects and initiatives that combine grants from government, NGOs, foundations, businesses, and high net worth individuals. So, and when we receive grant-funded money, we need to make sure that we procure it in the right way. And sometimes we have to adhere to different procurement policies from those grantors.
Fantastic. This conversation, we're going to talk specifically about supplier diversity. I guess we should probably start at the beginning in terms of what is supplier diversity? What do we mean when we talk about that?
Yes, great question to start with. So the way I define it is that it's procurement practices and programs that prioritize buying goods and services from supplier in underserved and underrepresented communities. You could also call it inclusive sourcing, and it's all about eliminating the barriers and making sure that all types of suppliers are invited to the table. Now, the definition of a diverse supplier is a business that is more than 51% owned or controlled by an individual or group that is traditionally underrepresented or marginalized. So this is kind of the common core of the ownership and control. And diversity can actually look quite different based on where you are, so across the globe. I mean, most often a diverse supplier could be a women-owned business, businesses owned by ethnic minorities, by people with disabilities, people identifying within the LGBTQ plus community, veterans, and then the latest one is also neurodiverse. So businesses owned by neurodiverse people or people with diverse neurological conditions. In some countries, there are official definitions of what a diverse supplier is. The great thing is that each company and governments can kind of define it for themselves, which gives a lot of flexibility.
Understood. Is this a topic where there is a different level of focus depending on the country? So in my research for our conversation today, it seemed to me that, for example, in the United States, this is a topic that's existed perhaps a little bit longer, I think since the civil rights movement. Is it something that, depending on where you look in the world, you get different views on?
I think so. And you're quite right. In the US, it's such an established thing, and we're still coming to grips with what that means in Europe. I think in the UK, actually, recently, the government put out a procurement notice that supplier diversity is now one of the priorities. They don't define it that specifically again. So yeah, it really depends on where you are, what it means, what it could mean.
How does the topic of supplier diversity fit into sustainability? Is it a subset of a wider agenda? Is it a different thing? How does that work?
Yeah, I think it definitely fits in the ESG, environmental, social, governmental agenda. And some people would call it kind of sustainable sourcing. Yeah, I think it's part of the idea that this moral imperative that we give equal access and opportunities to all people. What's really great is that supplier diversity is really taking hold with a number of large organizations. So a recent survey by the Hackett Group, which was only published in May this year, found that I think 67% of top 100 large US and global organizations, so 67% of those organizations have or will have a supplier diversity program, a global one by 2023. So yeah, it's a super important issue. And I actually think that we've moved beyond this moral imperative. We know it's the right thing to do, but let's just get down and do it because it's good for everyone. It's good for business.
To that point, Victoria, is there a business case for supplier diversity, aside from accepting that there is clearly a strong moral argument as to why it's important, but is there a pound note business case for organisations to take this topic seriously?
Yes, there's actually a very big business case. There's kind of the social benefits and the business benefits. Let me talk about the social benefits first. Supporting diverse suppliers creates jobs within these communities. It generates wealth for these communities, better health and education. And it's also about really investing in the communities that your company serves. So there's this idea that you should be investing in your communities, and also your supplier base should be reflecting the communities that you are serving. So it's kind of a circle of inclusion. HP estimates that their supplier diversity program contributes almost 700 million in overall economic impact. So that's kind of the social side of things. And from the business side of things, there's a number of benefits. Researchers found that including diverse suppliers fosters innovation and competitiveness, because these suppliers bring new ideas, different approaches. They can give you insights into the communities that they actually come from. So the other business benefit is that by having a supplier diversity program, you are also reflecting the values of your customer base. Increasingly, millennials and the Generation Z are very focused on doing good and buying from companies that are also displaying these values. Related to that is the ability to attract talent. So organizations that show positive attitudes towards diversity and inclusion, people are more likely to want to work for them. You might have heard during the COVID-19 pandemic, there were a lot of small businesses that kind of shifted their production towards what we needed, which was hand sanitizers, masks, and things like that. So that's where the diverse suppliers can be agile.
Interestingly, one of the things I'd read is actually that companies with more diverse supply chains were able to be more nimble and react much faster to a crisis like COVID-19. It seems like a very positive thing.
I mean, there really is no excuse not to do it anymore in today's society. And the other way you might want to look at it is, what are you missing out on by not having a diverse supply base?
Yeah. So we talked about a number of very positive benefits around agility, supporting brands, competitiveness, price, all things I'm sure that procurement audience that would typically listen to this podcast would be incredibly interested in delivering for their organizations. Maybe we could talk a little bit about some of the challenges around this agenda. And I guess the first question I had was, how do organizations actually make some positive progress on this agenda? And how do you measure it? Is it a targets? Is it another way of doing it? What's your view on that?
Yeah, actually, there is a lot of flexibility in how organizations tackle it. For me, coming from a relatively small organization, having a supplier diversity program obviously differs a lot from like IBM and Coca-Cola and Accenture, the ones that are really generating a lot of positive attention in the media, for example. I recently wrote an article for the World Economic Forum agenda, which you can find online. And there I outlined 3 things that anyone can really do to start off on a supplier diversity program. The first one is to have a compelling business case. I think that's quite usual for any program that you embark on, is to have a compelling business case. And it's probably more effective to align the business case with your organization's strategy, rather than focusing on the moral imperative again. So if you can link it to the strategy and to other goals that your organization has, that will make the business case a little bit easier. And then you talk about KPIs. I mean, there's some standard KPIs that you can track. First of all, it's important to have a baseline. And actually, most organizations already spend with diverse suppliers. So that's already a good message that you can send to the leadership team. If you do a baseline analysis, you can say, okay, we already spend 5% with diverse suppliers, and then you can use that to create your own KPIs and goals for your supply diversity program. To give a bit of context in terms of how much to spend on diverse suppliers, currently, again, with this Hackett study, these organizations spend around 7% of their spend with diverse suppliers, and they plan to increase that on average to 13% by 2025. And the top performers in that survey, or the top of the pack, say they want to spend 50% of their spend with diverse suppliers.
Victoria, you mentioned at the start, I guess part of this is the definition of what is a diverse supplier, which I guess in itself is a complex area. So I think you mentioned the 51% ownership by somebody from an underrepresented community was the definition. I was interested to explore that a little bit more. Does that on its own actually mean that the supplier is diverse, right? If you have 51% ownership, but very small number of employees, there must be a lot of complexity in that whole piece about how you understand who a diverse supplier is. Just interested to explore that a little bit.
Well, yes, it is complex. I mean, and it also depends on what type of supplier you're looking at. Because how do you define, for example, an LGBTQ business? How do they show that they are classified as a diverse supplier in certain ways? I think that's where these supplier diversity organizations come in. So there's a lot of organizations globally. A lot of them are based in the US, but they're moving more towards Europe now as well, and Asia. And these organizations certify the businesses. So I think they probably taken into consideration a lot of different factors when certifying these businesses. And that's probably a good starting point. I think the definitions currently are really based on the ownership and operation and the diversity of the workforce. While it can also be taken into consideration and can be interesting, that's secondary. It really needs to be owned. Yeah. And we're also talking mainly about small businesses. It's probably easier to define and certify them in that way.
A couple of questions to follow up on that. In your experience, is there a danger of this becoming a bit of a token gesture for certain companies, that they effectively trying to game it because they want to see the benefits that you talked about in terms of their brand, etc., or not?
Yes, I think this tokenistic behavior is big in all areas of business at the moment. I mean, you have also, from my finance sister's hat, you also have a lot of funds that are just rebranding as an ESG fund without doing anything differently. So yes, I think there's definitely the potential for this tokenistic behavior. But I think what you can do to alleviate that is to really embed these supplier diversity aspects into the policy, to make supplier diversity part of your leadership team's KPIs. So there's ways in which it can be addressed.
Again, I'm interested in your experience as a procurement professional. Do you see a challenge for procurement professionals where, this is obviously a hugely important topic that I'm sure lots of people care deeply about trying to move forward, but you have a wider sustainability agenda, and ultimately the ask of procurement is becoming much more complex because there's the issue about having a diverse supply chain, but there's an issue about making sure that supply chain is environmentally sound and doing the right things from a broader sustainability perspective. It feels to me there's an increasingly complicating picture starting to form for procurement professionals about how you make these decisions, because I guess in certain instances they can't all be mutually achievable. You have to put an importance one over the other. All the procurement professionals I know care deeply about moving all these topics forward, but I guess to some extent you've got to make some calls.
Yes, definitely. I do see it in my own experience at the World Economic Forum, where, we have a lot of other priorities and supply diversity competes with other priorities. I hope that we can find a way to collaborate across the organization to have a common goal, and supply diversity is not mutually exclusive with other things. And that's why also organizations need to allocate some budget to this. So you need to have ideally a dedicated supplier diversity professional looking into these things. They need to be closely linked with the CPO or have like a seat at the table with all the right decisions. So it's definitely possible if the budget is there and the will is there. And when I recently spoke with someone who tried to also do kind of a grassroots supplier diversity initiative in their organization, a bank in the UK, they actually said their biggest challenge was convincing their peers that it's the right thing to do. So in procurement, I think we can sometimes get stuck in the way of doing things the way we always have. And supplier diversity sourcing from smaller businesses could be seen as kind of opposite to what we've been trying to achieve in the past, which is consolidating the supply base and having these massive contracts for big suppliers focusing on savings. And now we're asked to kind of go the other way. So these are some challenges.
We talked a lot in this conversation about the need to kind of baseline to measure to understand how you improve and have a more diverse supply chain. I was interested to explore with you, do you think there are situations where actually companies need to be more interventionist? Because I guess some of these areas that we're talking about in terms of ownership, etc., is it enough just to leave the market to its own accord and measure it, and then that will be enough? Or do you think companies have to kind of intervene to actually help, women-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses, whatever it may be, to grow, to be successful, and actually become more interventionists in their supply chain to help these people?
Yes, that's a really great comment. And this is what a lot of organizations are doing now. They call it a supplier development program. So Accenture, for example, they're a leader in this. They have a program where small businesses can apply to become mentored, to join networking events. And Accenture sees developing a supply base professionally as a key way to ensure that they have the supply of suppliers. Because one of the issues at the moment that these big organizations are facing is that there just aren't enough small suppliers or diverse suppliers out there. And so they're trying to also create these suppliers and help them understand how they can respond to RFPs, because a lot of these suppliers don't know how to do that properly. It's about also adjusting the policies to be more cognizant of different suppliers' responses. So, for example, if you want to engage neurodiverse suppliers, maybe it's okay if their RFPs have a few spelling and grammatical errors, or you could even ask them to submit their responses via video. These are just different ways in which we can have different policies and processes, but also develop the suppliers from the ground up.
We talked a lot in this conversation about how procurement and professionals like yourselves can actually deliver real impact and real benefit to the world over and above cost saving. Are you positive about this, the future of this topic, and the direction that you're seeing in the market and from big companies, and where this will go in 5 or 10 years?
Yes, very excited. There's just so much that can be done. And the great thing is it's still such an emerging area that there's no right or wrong. So really anyone can decide to take this up as a topic they are interested in and do something to improve the state of the world. And what I also found is when I was learning about the topic and reaching out to different individuals, everyone working in this space is so generous with their time and so passionate. It's a really nice thing to be in, because, in procurement, sometimes you're negotiating with suppliers and you're kind of doing supplier relationship management, but supporting diverse suppliers is also a feel-good thing to do.
Victoria, that seems like a very appropriate place to end the conversation on a positive note. Thank you so much for your time today. I've really, really enjoyed that conversation. When we publish this podcast, we'll leave a link to the article that you wrote, that you mentioned, so that people can download that. Perhaps speaking on your behalf, but I'm sure if listeners have any questions or comments, that they can get in touch with yourself.
Yes, please reach out to me, and happy to link you in with also some other resources that I found that are super interesting.
Victoria, thank you again. Fascinating conversation. Really appreciate your time.